Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is Ukraine War News Update, the first part thereof for the 18th of June 2025. We are going to, goodness me, it's almost summer solstice already. We are going to look at the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply. Interesting numbers on here because there have been some significant upticks in a number of categories. So 1,040 personnel lost is about where we've seen it for the last few days or so. It's been hovering between 1,000 and 1,300 for most of the last couple of weeks, although just prior to that, maybe even about a week and a half, it was under 1,000, and we've had a little bit of movement with that as well since. 7 tanks, it's just below the daily average. That's certainly a little bit better. 31 troop carrying AFVs. Now, that is significantly over the daily average, which is about 21. And that shows that yesterday something must have happened, because we have seen sort of 5, 7, that kind of area in terms of AFV losses for some time now. The last time it was high was when there was a claim of that train with the hoppers and drones possibly coming out, or something happened, and it really ticked upwards that day. But other than that, it's been very minimal. So something happened yesterday. Artillery systems 37. That's about 1.5 times the daily average, or just over. So that's pretty decent. And 1 multiple launch rocket system, also an uptick in the vehicles and fuel tanks there, 137. So I would suggest that there was more activity yesterday than we've seen otherwise. Let's look at Jakub Janovsky, from Oryx, totting up the losses for both sides. We have 26 Russian losses against 9 Ukrainian losses. And remember, this is only in combat assets losses, doesn't include for Oryx here golf buggies, quads, motorcycles, bukankas, SUVs, all those kind of vehicles that the Russians have been using in great quantities. And so you would imagine that those numbers would be far, far different when you're looking at overall equipment lost there. But anyway, in terms of the traditional combat assets, we have a T-90M here lost. That's Russia's best tank. Other than that, not too much to report. Multiple launch rocket system, a couple of those added to the list. One was probably the MLRS that was loaded with the chemical warfare munitions, and I showed that exploding yesterday. Now, for the Ukrainians, really not too much other than a multiple launch rocket system there as well. So nothing too much to write home about. Here we have an anecdote or a bit of data. Major Andriy Yartsev, battalion commander of the Russian 30th Motorized Rifle Regiment, was eliminated. So the battalion commander there is fairly significant. That's in the Andriivka area, which is, I believe, will be up in the Sumy area, where the Ukrainians have been trying hard to push the Russians back. First Assault Battalion, the Black Swan of the 225th. I've got 225th patch just there. In fact, yep, pointing to it there. So the 225th Separate Assault Regiment entered the command post of the battalion of the 30th Assault Brigade or Motorized Rifle Regiment, of the Russian Army. So they obviously they pushed forward enough to be able to storm the command post of that unit. That's fairly significant. And I do believe that Andriivka has been taken back, has it not? There's been lots of talk about that. I'll try and do a mapping update today, actually. Now, today in the Konstantinivka direction, who knew? We've got some confirmatory data. And this is where you start looking at what you want if you're seeking to confirm or disconfirm the Ukrainian general staff figures, which is a project we've been doing now for 2 years plus, right? Which is, are we justified in believing what the Ukrainians are claiming? Are we justified in believing what the Russians are claiming? I think we've dismissed the Russian claims pretty much out of hand these days as being ridiculous, predominantly because, they don't really release official data as much as they used to, actually. But when they have done it, it's been wildly inaccurate. I mean, impossibly so. So they have claimed that Ukraine has lost more aircraft than they have had and been given. Right, the numbers are literally impossible. So we kind of dismiss the Russians' stats fairly much out of hand these days. But the Ukrainian stats, I think we built up a sensible enough picture to suggest that the Ukrainians are fairly accurate with what they are claiming. And I often say that the most inaccurate is potentially going to be the personnel, because that's the most difficult to visually verify. Andrew Perpetua does a job with that, but there's a massive difference between those who are visually confirmed to have died and personnel, the official personnel numbers. But when it comes to things like tanks and AFVs, you can easily confirm that, because you look at the video of that getting blown up, that is, and you have the pictures of that piece of kit getting blown up, that's a piece of kit getting blown up. When you blow up a command post, you don't know how many people are in there, right? And you're kind of guessing 15, and you submit that, and that gets added. So there's a lot of guesstimation with that first number, but with all these other numbers, I think it would be a strict one-to-one. They have to provide evidence for this. Sorry, my computer having a funny 5 seconds there. Okay, so what is useful is when there's an anomaly. And that's, I think, what we have here. So 31 troop-carrying AFVs. Oh, right. So the Ukrainian General Staff have submitted that to the general public to say that was what was lost. And what we would like to see is, a bit of a one-off event that could confirm that data. What do we have? Well, today in Konstantinivka direction, yesterday, the Russians attempted to carry out an unusual, for now, large-scale mechanized assault. So remember, we've been seeing motorbikes and quads and bukankas and all sorts of other things being used to attack. And that has often led to the vehicles and fuel tanks number being fairly high, which is interestingly also very high today. So it is unusual to see a large-scale mechanized assault. As a result, the Russians lost, says Max 25, 15 units of heavy equipment, 5 to 8 units of motorized equipment, and a lot of dead manpower. No reports that the Ukrainian forces destroyed a large Russian column near Yablonivka on the Konstantinivka front. 23 units of heavy equipment, as MTLBs, tanks, BMPs, along with quads and motorcycles, were eliminated. And what's great here is that the Ukrainian General Staff say, this has happened, a spike in the number, and we get the confirmation that there is indeed activity to suggest a spike in that number, visually confirmed, is caught on video, we know what was blown up, and you're left thinking, okay, in this incident, the Ukrainian General Staff are being accurate. This is confirmation, at least today, that the Ukrainian, and in these particular figures, that Ukrainian General Staff are being accurate. And I think that that's good for where I'm at, which is taking these figures as being pretty reliable. Okay, so that happened. We have another video of quite a lot of Russian medium range reconnaissance and strike drones here getting taken out by Ukrainian interceptor drones. I did a live chat the other day with Dimko Zhluktenko, who is a reconnaissance drone operator operating out of Donetsk, just behind the front lines there. And that was a fascinating interview. Please go and check that out. It was kind of live. We had a couple of tech issues. One of them was my own tech issue, but it was a really good chat with someone who is on the front now. One of the things I asked a question about, where are the asymmetries? Where does Ukraine have the advantage in terms of drones? Where do the Russians have an advantage in terms of drones? And one thing, I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, he said that the Ukrainians still have an advantage with interceptor drones. So they are better equipped, it seems, to take out these kinds of drones than the Russians. And it was fascinating because he confirmed what Andrew Perpetua previously stated, because Andrew Perpetua looks at a lot of these videos as they come out on Telegram and wherever, and his team. There's one that is a guy called Artem, I think, on his team, that has done all of the, in fact, if we go and find his map, I'll show this to you because it's well worth understanding. They have been mapping drone interceptions over quite some time. So in fact, I think if we can go back in time and look at sort of some of these areas and see exactly what I'm talking about. So here's an example where you can see an awful lot of intercepted drones. So although this would be montages being evaluated by probably Artem here on the Andrew Perpetua map here, so these won't have happened all in one day, but you kind of look at the montages that we're just referencing in the moment and you're thinking, okay, we have no way of chronologically placing these, so we just put them all on the map in one day. But this is where I think the Ukrainians still have an advantage. They are better able to take out these drones. And in fact, the Tochny team were telling us on one of the lives, while speaking to them about this, that they are, I think it might have been on their live, where they were saying that the Russians are now treating these as one-way drones to a great extent. So they will send up these reconnaissance drones into Ukrainian territory thinking there's a very large chance we're not going to get this back. Dimko the other night was saying with his drone, and he didn't say exactly what drone it was. He says he also uses Shark, so it's not a Shark drone, but it's another type of drone. That he was talking about having used them for like tens, hundreds of missions, and so when they do lose them, it's often like malfunction, and then to be spotted, electronic warfare, all of these other things, surface-to-air missiles or whatever. But it seems that the Ukrainian drones do not get taken down to the same extent that the Russian drones get taken down, and that is an asymmetry that you would like to see continue. Anyway, here is a video of a whole bunch of these Russian drones getting intercepted by Ukrainian interceptor drones. That is an asymmetry I would like to see continue. Right, here we have yet again another example of Ukrainians using guided glide bombs effectively. Why I've included this one today is it seems like it might have been a really successful strike on a pretty decent troop accumulation. This is a Su-27 pilot carrying out a surprise strike on Russian troops near Borisivka, northeast of Kharkiv. Russian forces had occupied a basement in a damaged building. A full company was observed over several days. So sometimes these, I don't know whether it's a case of like observe for a long time, make sure that that's a bona fide target, or it's a case of actually it might take a bit of time to make sure they can get a plane, because those planes are obviously, there are all sorts of units asking for guided glide bombs to be used for targets that they've spotted. So there's going to be a competition as who, and there'll be the aviation, the Air Force will be, I presume, prioritizing what has the greatest value. So it could be that they observed these guys for a couple of days because that's how long it took to get an airplane to take them out. Anyway, that's a building that was completely shellacked, and there might have been some fairly significant troop losses for the Russians there. Now, we're going to go to last night's activities with distance munitions here. Or in Ukraine, there were 58 drones that were sent in, 30 were taken down. So actually, that's a fairly large number of drones that got through. That's a pretty poor interception rate. It's almost 50%. And although it's 50% of a much smaller number, that is still, if you're thinking about the 440 drones sent the night before, which was one hell of a heavy night, what was it, 404 of them were shot down, so that was 36. Here we have 28, so it's not that far away from the damage arguably that was done. Obviously you're going to have 404 drones falling to the ground and burning and exploding still, so a lot of the damage that gets done is done via falling debris and whatnot. So you're going to have far less of that. There's only going to be 30 drones that are falling down and causing a problem. But in terms of hitting targets, 28 drones from last night is a pretty significant number. 12 were shot down, 18 were suppressed by electronic warfare. No missiles appear to have been sent in. So a much, much quieter night overall, but still quite a few getting through. Now, I think the place that was hit the hardest last night was Zaporizhia, the city of Zaporizhia itself, under attack overnight. Aftermath of the Russian assault last night was a Novoposhka postal facility completely destroyed, and that's what you can see sadly in the video there. Novoposhka do an amazing job of delivering packages and mail even to war zones. 47 vehicles were burned in an open parking area, 9 apartment buildings damaged, and 6 non-residential buildings also damaged. I mean, that's some pretty wide-scale damage done to Zaporizhia there, so that's a real shame. Consequences of the Russian attack, night attack on Zaporizhia. The city was attacked with 9 shaheeds, and you can see there in a pretty what looks like industrial commercial area, there's an awful lot of damage done. Those are all cars belonging to people and trucks belonging to people and their enterprises, and it's, you know, this just hurts. Continued cumulative pain, economic pain for these people. You know, even if you don't lose lives, which is, you know, absolutely fantastic when there are no deaths, as I don't think there are here. It's just, you know, this is happening over and over throughout Ukraine, and economically speaking, this really does hurt. Okay, so another branch of Novopochta was destroyed by Russia. 13 attack drones smashed into delivery service building, warehouses and nearby area. Various fires and damage to shops, cars and apartments was also caused, says Tim White. And here you can see some of the damage done in Zaporizhia. That's an apteka, which is Ukrainian for chemist, pharmacy. So that is, Zaporizhia. Free Donetsk region as well was also hit. A lot more damage and civilians hurt. The videos from Sviatohirsk, where 5 people were injured, 3 apartment blocks, 15 private houses, an administrative building, shopping pavilions and a garage. 8 cars were also damaged. So again, a lot of activity concerning both civilian and commercial infrastructure. Also, overnight, Kramatorsk was attacked in Free Donetsk, hit by long-range drones. Among the places damaged was an animal shelter. I guess Russia State TV will say it was full of Nazis. The dogs, no doubt, reading Mein Kampf and the cats playing Sims. That's a reference to... some of you will remember that the FSB supposedly uncovered some Nazi Ukrainian activity in... I think it was in St. Petersburg, where they're going to do supposedly going to do some kind of assassination hit, and they were found with 3 copies of Sims, or a couple of copies of the Sims game. And the theory is that someone in the FSB had given a shopping list of things to get. And in fact, I'm going to find that image. Here it is. Unfortunately, it's not the full version. Full version, you can see the crease on the Nazi t-shirt, like it's just been ordered and opened from the package. And 3 copies of Sims. So the theory is, and this book was interesting because it's like completely unread. It's an ideological book that's very famous for being, I think, you know, Ukrainian, like neo-Nazi paraphernalia or whatever. And it just had the inscription inside it read, it said something, and then it was signed unnamed, right? Literally the word unnamed. So you start piecing this together. Creased t-shirt that never looks like it's been worn. A brand new book that's never been read with an inscription, which is signed by someone that says unnamed, and 3 copies of The Sims. It was clearly an FSB shopping list that says, right, what I want you to go and get are these things, because we're going to place them in a room to make it look like some Ukrainians were working undercover. We're going to have some wigs. And there were things like little pictures of Hitler and stuff like that stuck to like the lampshades and stuff, like as if like, when you're working undercover, you take with you like a swastika t-shirt and all this stuff. You're like, oh, we're going on an undercover mission because we're like neo-Nazi Ukrainian fascists, and we're going to go undercover to assassinate some people in Russia. So what we want to take is all the things that are going to identify us as the exact people we're pretending not to be. Just so this was insane. I wrote an article on this. Unfortunately, the website is down from where I wrote the article, but it was a great article because it set out all of the nonsenses, and there were loads more pictures. But the Sims game, so it must have been like someone saying, right, what we need are 3 Sims, as in Sims for phones. So you could say that they were using burner phones. We want 3 Sims, we want a swastika t-shirt, we want this book, but I want it signed with an inscription, but I want it signed unnamed, as in don't put a name down, like do the inscription but don't leave a name, because they could then try and work out who that is and work out as a load of rubbish. So leave it unnamed, but then the person had written in the inscription and then signed unnamed. And they bought 3 copies of the game Sims. So whoever did a shopping list, like they put 3 Sims down, go on Amazon and go, oh, let's get 3 Sims, 3 copies of the Sims game. So anyway, it's that kind of level of ridiculousness. So there you go. So that's why he says, reading Mein Kampf and cats playing Sims. It's that kind of thing. Okay. So here we have a hospital strike in Sumy region. Actually, it's one that hasn't even been completed yet, but they decided to strike that. To be fair, these are the sorts of buildings that you are going to be using. Probably, if it's an unfinished hospital building, you're going to be using that to house troops. I mean, I assume if it's 5 to 6 kilometres from the border, you're not going to be using that as a hospital. That's for sure. So then we're going to go on to the strikes from not last night, but the night before. This is Kalen, and this is a scene from Europe's largest country and its capital city here. So this is Kiev on the morning of those incredible strikes. This is why there were helicopters flying around, dropping water. This just looks fairly horrific, and that's just views from one small panorama there from one area of Kiev. Then we had Kalen again saying Ukraine did nothing to deserve this. Europe has learned zero lessons despite 2 world wars. And what's he talking about? Well, of course, the cluster munitions being utilized and just wanton destruction of Ukraine here. So as you can see, that looked like a very fast traveling ballistic missile. It's fairly low to the ground, actually, releasing some cluster munitions there. And Kalen is rightfully raging about that. Then yesterday I reported that there were 2 parents who were waiting by the rubble of a destroyed building for their son to see if their son survived. Someone said later in the thread that, they found him and he's alive. It's a real happy ending. And actually that wasn't true. There was some disinformation that got out. Now, these are, I believe, different parents. Tragic sad news from Kiev early. Many accounts here wrote about a small boy being rescued from the rubble to the joy of his parents, but they didn't check. I did. The awful truth was now being confirmed. Police found the boy's body, breaking the hearts of his parents. But I think that the two, and that's like heartbreaking. When these apartment blocks seem to be targeted by the Russians purposefully. The people who die are innocent civilians. Now, the parents who were waiting that I showed you the images of, I think it wasn't a young son they were worried about. It's actually a 31-year-old son, Dmitro, whose parents waited all day by the rubble of the destroyed apartment building in Kiev, hoping to find him alive. He was a first-year master's student studying physical education. He also enjoyed hiking in the mountains and tried his hand at stand-up comedy, and he was who died there. So, innocent people dying in what was, horrific circumstances. Tim White said it's been a difficult night and morning. So that's this morning, concerning what took place yesterday and the previous night. It's been a very difficult night and morning in Kiev, where rescue efforts continued throughout the night following yesterday's massive bombardment of the capital. Sadly, no one else has been found alive in the rubble of the destroyed apartment block in Solomyansky. But you can see here the rescue workers doing their very worthwhile jobs there. The latest figures I have, says Tim White, is that there are now 26 confirmed deaths. I was reporting 15 yesterday. So that's another 11 added to that. 26 deaths from Kiev. 19 of the bodies were from the missile strike, which destroyed a whole block of the apartment building in Solomyansky. And that was, remember, a night of strikes where the Russians officially announced that they had hit all of the targets. Objectives were achieved with precision missiles striking military targets. And of course, that's empirically false, absolutely false. So Anton Gerashenko had earlier said 22 people, it's now 26, I think, killed in Kiev. 134 more were injured. Their mourning is today. Deepest condolences to the families of those who lost loved ones there. And that's the apartment building that collapsed as a missile slammed into the bottom part of it, destroying levels right down to the basement, and then everything else collapsed on top of it. It's worth remembering that reminding ourselves consistently of the human costs to these strikes. It's just horrific, and that is what the Russians are doing consistently. Here we have Odessa. So Odessa was struck, again, this is not last night, but 2 nights ago, was struck on that same night. An inclusive resource centre that provided services to thousands of children with disabilities was destroyed by the Russian attack. 2 animals participating in canine therapy, a method of treatment and rehabilitation using specially trained dogs, were killed as a result of the shelling. Again, you know, I don't know how you justify this, but the Russians are just doing it so often. You know, you couldn't have picked something more heinous for them to have kind of struck. You know, if you're, but no one seems to care anymore. Like, as in outside of our own little circle of interested people, because the horrific visuals from last night would have been lost in the stories about Iran and Israel, about Trump leaving G7, about all the crazy things in the UK. It's the grooming gangs investigation, and this kind of stuff gets put to the back burner. You can understand why after 3 years plus of war and the similar kinds of pictures coming out, but sometimes I think we just need to throw this back in people's faces and say, just to remind you, Putin is a disgusting human being whose generals and armed forces are carrying out disgusting activities, killing and maiming innocent people throughout the country, innocent animals throughout the country. And indeed, Ukraine's foreign ministry said that Putin deliberately ordered that attack precisely during the G7 summit in order to portray the leaders as weak. May well have succeeded to some degree. He is deliberately demonstrating complete contempt for international peace efforts, primarily the efforts of the USA. And there are some people, of course, who are saying that Trump left a day early, predominantly because I was listening to Alistair Campbell talk about this morning, saying that, you know, what he could have done concerning discussions about Iran and Israel could have been done from Alberta, right? You have the ability now to very easily do that kind of connectivity with the people that you need to from a distance, right? But he left early, and some analysts are saying leaving early was a public display of contempt for the organisation of the G7, and almost to say that I am more important than this whole alliance. You know, he has a contempt for alliances in general, the EU, NATO, G7. He's saying I'm bigger than this, and I'm actually going to minimise the importance of G7 because actually you're disagreeing with me on Israel and Iran, and you're disagreeing with me on Ukraine and Russia. So I'm just going to leave you a day early, and what are you going to do about it? Go and have your little talk about things that you think are important. I'm off to go and do other stuff. If you want me here, you have to wait till next year or 6 months or whatever. And I think that sounds pretty reasonable to me. Now, the Kiev Independent reports that hours after that deadly attack from yesterday, from 2 nights ago, the deadly attack on Kiev, Trump was unaware it had even happened. Now, I reported on this. It was on a plane hours after it happened, and the journalists say, "What are your views on this?" And he said, "I don't know. I don't know anything about it. When was this? What happened?" And I had a rant yesterday about how can the President of the United States not be aware of basic facts about these really important conflicts going on around the world, to the point that the journalists and people like me know more about this stuff than he does when it happens. And you know, Kiev Independent reporting like this is, you know, complaining that he was unaware it had even happened. At the time of writing, some 7 hours later, the White House still is yet to comment on the attack, they wrote. So not only didn't know about it, but then does nothing to, says nothing concerning it. It's as if it's just another day at the office in terms of what goes on in Ukraine. He doesn't care about Ukraine. And if there is another horrific night of killing of civilians, he's like, nah, oh well, I'm thinking about Iran now. Don't really care too much about Ukraine. You can get on and deal with that yourself, Europe. There is that. Now, moving on to other bits and pieces now, this last section of the video, got quite a, I think, fascinating little summary of kind of what's gone on in the war compared to what Israel have achieved in their war against Iran. So we have Max25 saying Russians here were finally working, starting to figure it out. So this is a Russian source. So Rusich, so pretty. He says Russian Nazis are starting to figure it out. That's because Rusich really are a fascistic organization of Russians. So 1, Israel participated in the operation against Iran for several days. Russia has been participating in the operation against Ukraine for several years. 2, Israeli aviation bombs Iranian targets without losses and has complete air superiority. Russian aviation loses more aircraft than it produces during the operation. 3, Israel destroyed the top of Iran's military political administration. Russia cannot even strike at the decision-making centre, let alone eliminate the military political administration of Ukraine. 4, Israeli air defence repelled hundreds of missile launches and only a few reached their targets. Russian air defence allows light-engine crop duster aircraft, air gazelles, to pass through. 5, Israeli intelligence services operate in Iran as if it were their home. There is virtually no activity by Russian intelligence services in Ukraine. 6, but actually there's an asterisk there. This does not mean that, as some beauty bloggers tell us, you don't need to know about it, everything is there. 6, Israel strikes Iranian TV channels. Russia is unable to stop the work of Ukrainian television. And when we are told that one of the countries is not yet at war, it turns out that it is at full force. Apparently, a full-scale war for one of the sides means throwing huge amounts of freshly mobilised meat at the front and not technology. Guess which one? In other words, what he's saying at the end here is that Russia is not even at war, supposedly. This is just a special military operation. But it actually turns out we are using everything we can, and we still can't achieve all of what Israel has achieved in just a couple of days. And we are supposed to be the second greatest army in the world. And I think that's a fairly justified response there from those people. Anyway, moving on to the G7, just really quickly, Ukraine is in trouble after Trump left the G7 summit without Zelensky, reported The Guardian. The Ukrainian delegation was left disappointed and even embittered by the fact that Trump did not make Ukraine a priority at the summit. And and so it will be from now on. Just assume that they are on the Russian side fully. Ukraine left in the lurch as Trump rushes out of the G7 without meeting Zelensky. US President has said he had to leave to focus on Israel-Iran conflict without addressing the Russia-Ukraine ceasefire, said the newspaper. Now, Canada then scrapped plans for a strong G7 statement on the war in Ukraine after US resistance, according to Reuters. Ottawa said that Washington pushed to soften the language, a move Canada felt was unfair to Ukraine, as President Zelensky arrived at the summit. So again, really controversial, but shows completely what side the Trump administration appears to be on. So then we go on to the United Kingdom yesterday imposed more sanctions on Russia to hit finance, the military and energy. The Shadow Fleet was also focused, and underwater intelligence gathering are particularly important, says Tim White. Now, that's in response to Trump saying, we're not going to sanction Russia because A, it's too expensive to do so, and B, we want to wait to see what Europe do. They haven't done anything yet, but when they'll do, we'll see how it goes. And of course, my response was, yes, they have. They've done 17 rounds of sanctions, and they're putting an 18th in place. They've done an absolute ton in terms of sanctions. What they want you to do is look at that and follow suit. And on that same day, as he whinges that Europe's not done, Europe needs to make a move on this first, UK adds to their already pretty extensive sanctions list. And then, of course, he says, well, we need an agreement first, then we'll sanction. Of course, that's completely the wrong way round. You sanction so that they sign an agreement. You don't sanction people after an agreement. Anyway, I whinged about that yesterday. So the UK has imposed new sanctions on Russia, adding 10 individuals and 20 vessels, including oil tankers, to the blacklist. The measures target maritime companies, electronics suppliers, and those undermining Ukraine's territorial integrity. So that's good news. And Kaja Kallas says Putin cannot be trusted as a mediator. She urges the EU to tighten Russian oil cap after deadly Kiev strike. So that's a mediator in the Iran-Israel conflict, but also urges the EU to tighten the Russian oil cap. The oil price cap is something that the US has refused to sanction being brought down. They are resisting pressures to do so. Kaja Kallas has urged the EU to press forward with lowering the oil price cap on Russian crude even without that US support, and I would be fully in concordance with that. Now, talking about oil price caps and the shadow fleet that transports that oil around the world. Here we have a tanker, and I think is one of 3 tankers in the Strait of Hormuz that is in trouble. This is the Adeline tanker burning in the Gulf of Oman after being rammed by the Front Eagle tanker. What is interesting is the Adeline is part of the Russian shadow fleet. What that also means that this will be uninsured as well, I would presume. So that is a tanker that is in a lot of trouble and is also a member of the Russian shadow fleet. Now, there are 2 things. I couldn't find the other one again. So the first thing that passed in Parliament, in the Verkhovna Rada, the Ukrainian Parliament, was the ability for people to have dual passports, which is something that could have an effect on their ability to mobilize. So you might have people from the Ukrainian diaspora that would be happy to come back, but they can't kind of join up because they've only got the passport of whatever country they're in, because they're not allowed to have dual passports. Now they can have dual passports. They might be able to draw on people outside of Ukraine more easily to join their armed forces. But the flip side of that, and I haven't really looked into this, I don't know what the details are, but the flip side would be that people can get passports of other nations that they have ancestors from or whatever, and then go to those nations, emigrate to those nations, and then they can't be, it's a way of evading draft for the armed forces. So that could go either way. So that's the first thing. The second one is that it's also passed the Verkhovna Rada a state asset agency reform, crucial for getting funding from the EU. So and I don't know the technicalities of this, but anyway, they made reforms to state asset agency after months of obstructions, and this has led to the unblocking of 600 million euros. So that's $690 million in EU funds. So that is going to be very well received, I'm sure. And then I'm going to leave you on a bit of a positive here. This is a platoon of boars running across the front line at night here. So this is Boar Watch, as my goodness, that's quite a platoon, single file, marching into enemy territory or something. I don't know, but that's a lot of boars. Good to see some wildlife still kicking about near the front lines. Anyway, that's enough from me. Thank you very much for watching. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.